Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar from Horizon Stewardship, communicating with your leadership, ministry, and financial and high capacity donors during social distancing. I'm Norma Quinn, a vice president with Horizons, and I will be your host today. I've spent several decades in local parish ministry and as conference treasurer, and now my full-time ministry is with Horizons. You are going to experience quite a bit of information over the next few moments as we unpack this topic for you. What I want to let you know is that this is being recorded and the slide deck will also be available to you. You will find those at our online resource library, giving365.com. The recording will be available tomorrow. The slide deck will be available after our presentation here. I do want to ask for your grace. We are all broadcasting from across the United States in our homes, and the bandwidth might be a little sketchy at times, but we are certainly going to remain present with you, and we pray that this is a great experience for you. I do want to let you know who is working with us today on this. Craig Miller is also a vice president and has been in stewardship ministry and local parish ministry for a number of years. Craig is going to be answering your questions throughout this webinar. So if you have a question that pops up in your mind, just simply send it using the question button that you find on your screen, and Craig will be answering those. We will also have an opportunity at the end of the broadcast to answer questions with time allowing. In addition to Craig and myself, Latresa Wilson is our Director of Support Solutions at Horizons, and Latresa is the one who makes all of this possible. And so we appreciate everyone's expertise. I want to introduce you to our CEO, Joseph Park. Joe has been a member of Horizons team for about 20-something years. Prior to that, he was the president of a bank holding company. And so he marries his love of the church and his ministry with his financial acumen. And so I think that you are going to find him to be quite a resource for you. And so, Joe, welcome to this webinar.
Thank you, Norma, and welcome to everybody who is joining us today. There probably has been not been a better time in our history to develop some of the best practices around generosity. You as church leaders today have the attention of your church in a way that we haven't had in the past. And we are seeing churches who are doing great works, that are seeing record numbers of people worshiping online with them, record numbers of people engaging in their small group discipleship activities, record numbers of people who are doing service, delivering groceries, helping churches stay connected with their members by working the phone trees. And one of the areas that we want to make sure that you're also focusing on is building relationships with your ministry and financial leaders. And today I'm thrilled to be introducing Joel Michael. Joel is a friend, he is a colleague, he is a partner at Horizon Stewardship. He serves on our leadership team. He is the author of numerous books, ebooks, and articles. And one of those has to do with leading financial leaders. That's the book that you see here on the screen, The Ministry of Giving, written by him, Bill McMillan, and Kimberly Stewart. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Joel to take us through the process.
Joe, thank you so much for the introduction, and want to add my welcome and thank you to all of those that are on the call today. We are honored by your presence, and just grateful that you would choose to spend some time with us on this Friday morning. So thank you for joining us. So we do want to this morning talk about, I'm trying to advance here and it's not letting me.
Joe, click on your screen. Just
Yeah.
click on the screen now. Try.
There we go. There we go. Norma, thank you for that halo of grace that you asked earlier on, as we're all still learning how to do this. So as Joe said, we want to talk a little bit with you today about how to just stay engaged with the leadership of your church in this season. And we want to think about the potential of 4 different leadership groups. There will be some overlap in these groups, but it does present the opportunity for you as church leaders to reach out and to touch 4 different groups. The first would be your ministry leaders. And so ministry leaders in a church would be anyone currently in a position of leadership. They're on a team, a ministry group, could be a leader of a small group, leader of a Sunday school. Many churches just talk about teams, and so it'd be any team leader, communication, worship, hospitality, committee chairs. In other churches, it could be deacons, elders, council session board, and vestry. But these are folk that are invested in your church with their time and with their talent. Also, I think there's a group here that may be untitled at this particular time. They may have formerly been a deacon or an elder or served on a session or a vestry, but currently they are not in an elected role, but they are still seen as tremendous leaders and influencers in your church. And the point here is this typically is a group that are going to account for 35 to 40% of your total giving. So those are your ministry leaders. A second group that we want you to kind of give some consideration to would be your financial leaders. Your financial leaders typically are givers who would, in a 12-month period, give about $10,000 or more in that 1-year time period. Now, in larger churches, this might be a higher number, and in smaller churches, this could be a lower number. So in a smaller church, your threshold might be 6,000. In a larger church, it might be 15,000. But kind of a middle of the road number is when we think about financial leaders, they give about $10,000 per year. From a percentage of your families, it's about 10% of your families. And this group will give somewhere between 35 and 50% of the total annual giving. Often, but not always, this is a group that is in a better position to weather these difficult times. So here's why it's important to stay engaged with your financial and ministry leaders. Together, these 2 groups represent about 20% of your total families, but they give about 80% of the giving. They do about 80% of the ministry that's being done. And this is that Pareto principle, that 20-80 rule. This group will often step up to help when others can't, or they're just not in a position to be able to step in and step out. They will have the most influence in your church. And if invited and engaged and connected, they'll use that engagement to support the leadership of the church. They are always full of wisdom and creative ideas. And this is a season that we are trying to be creative and innovative in our reaching out to our church and to our communities. And this is a group that you want to consider tapping into for their wisdom. This crisis is a tremendous opportunity to get them even more deeply engaged with you and with the ministries of this church. And my experience from being a staff member as in my previous life, and now as a layperson, this is a group that just wants to be in the know. They want to feel like they have information when possible, even before it's disseminated to the rest of the church. So here are a couple of strategies to consider in reaching out and making contact with this group. The first would be a direct contact of some type. It could be a personal video from you, could be an email. Earlier in this journey, we talked about hand signed letters. I've actually had some folk that have said this might not be the time to send a letter and then to send it to the post office and then to the mail carrier. You can make that call, but this is a unique opportunity to make a direct contact with this group as soon as possible. And we've included in Giving 365 a sample letter that can be contextualized or culturalized for your church that would be a touch to both of these groups together. In the spirit of just keeping them in the know and keeping them connected over the next 4 to 6 weeks, ever how long this would last, consider a weekly or bi-weekly touch with this group. Again, this is in addition to anything that you might already be doing church-wide, but a unique touch with this group, separate from what you're doing parish-wide or church-wide, that would just include any new information or developments. Something inspirational about the ministry that your church is doing, and then some kind of a call to action, some kind of an invitation to be engaged, connected, or involved. And the context of this might be where you might say something to the effect that tomorrow I'm going to send a letter out to our church with this information, just wanted you to hear it first, or this coming Sunday in our live stream, we're going to talk about this, just wanted you to be the first to hear it. So great way to engage and connect with people and to let them feel needed and wanted. Another way, another strategy for staying connected is, and we touched on this earlier, is just lean into those with known and proven leadership skill sets for wisdom and perspective. Proverbs reminds us that there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors. So remember that in your church, you probably have some business leaders that are giving leadership within your community, some just community leaders that are on boards within your community that are in this season shouldering an unusual amount of pressure and workload, and then the medical leaders in your church. So as you think about a unique touch to this group, if you've got business leaders, let them know you're praying for them. Community leaders, tell them how proud you are of them. And your medical leaders, be sure they know that you, as their pastor, as their minister, that you are praying for them. Another strategy, another approach to your leadership in this season would be your top givers. And in some churches, this could be your top 10. In other churches, it could be your top 50. And so it would be in proportion to the number of families you have and the number of giving units. But we're encouraging you to reach out to this group with a phone call. And the call is not an ask to give. It's not a financially driven call. It's a relationally driven call. It's a pastoral call. And so a part of the call, you might consider asking questions such as, how are you doing? How's your family? How are things in your work and in your business? What are you experiencing in your personal prayer life in this season? How can I pray for you? How can the church be there for you? Thank you so much for the generosity of your time and your talent and your resources. But this would be a unique touch to your top givers. I'm gonna pitch it to Joe, coming from the business world, and then in his work as the CEO of Horizons. I know that this is a real passion for Joe. And so Joe, let me pitch it to you and let you add some commentary to this.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about this, and particularly in this season and this time, you are going to find among your top donors a disproportionate number of small business owners, entrepreneurs. As we look at giving across the board, we see a distinct practice between people who own small businesses being toward the upper end of generosity. As a group, they're far more generous than the typical W-2 income earner. And it may be that they're that much more grateful because of the resources that they have. They live on the edge. No one is guaranteeing them a paycheck. Well, in this season where there's so much economic disturbance, this group is under a tremendous amount of pressure trying to figure out how they're going to keep their staffs, how they're going to do business in this different environment. Can they survive this? And it's not helpful for them to turn around and share their anxieties with their employees and their friends, and that just raises anxiety with everybody. So as a pastor, you can play a very unique role of stepping in, asking how things are going with them, how things are going with their business, and the stickiness, the relationships that can be built that will pay dividends for them sharing wisdom with you in the future, them investing more deeply in the ministries of the church are going to pay off. In my own life, when I was a bank president, my pastor befriended me, and maybe I was on a list as a financial leader in the church, but he came alongside me. He would ask me these questions every time we got together, and it deepened our relationship because it gave me a place to talk about what I was experiencing on the inside that I couldn't always share because I had to keep that brave face to the world. So this is a special time. It's a sticky time. It is a Mary and Barry kind of relationship builder. And if you will make this effort now, it will help you in the long run, draw them more closely to your ministries and deeper into relationship with you. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, Joe, thank you so much for that perspective. And that is a great segue into the fourth group that we want to talk about today. So we've talked about ministry leaders, people in positions of leadership and influence, our financial leaders, typically those that give 10,000 a more year, again, contextualized for your church. The third group would be your top givers. And again, that is going to be, the number would be relative to the size of your church. But another group would be the high capacity givers, some of which Joe has talked about just now. And for the sake of a definition or description, I refer to these folk when I'm working with churches is they just have the gift of earning, but along with that gift of earning, they have a beating heart of generosity. And these are folk that I've learned in my 20 years of this ministry of stewardship and generosity. They are some of the most generous people in the church, and they typically are looking for places where they can give and where they can invest. These would be business owners, corporate executives, just folk in high income vocations. And remember the comment that I shared earlier. In all of these groups, there may be some overlap. And so some of these business owners and executives may be ministry leaders, and they also may be in your financial leaders, and they may be in your top givers, but they may not. They may not yet have moved into any of those groups, but they have been given to you. They're coming to your church, and God has given to them to you to steward them in their discipleship journey. These are folk that often are capable of making 6- and 7-figure gifts to the church. Our experience, research shows that probably these are folk that are giving to 8 to 10 nonprofits. And they, at the same time, are often serving on the boards and in advisory roles with these nonprofits. And just as a parenthetical statement, we want to remind ourselves that these nonprofits are reaching out to these folk. And I'm sure, like me, many of you have been getting emails and text from nonprofits that are asking for those that are passionate about those nonprofits to step up their giving. Well, please know that these folk in your church are also being approached. And by them. We just don't want to be on the sidelines in this season. And maybe another reason to think about touching base with your high capacity givers is these are folk by virtue of their role, their connections. They see a bigger picture of what's going on. Many of us, it's hard sometimes to see the forest for the trees. But this is a group often just by virtue of their position, their role, their leadership, they can see a bigger picture that sometimes is just good perspective for us.
Joel, before you leave that slide, I think it's important for you to realize this careful distinction: high capacity donors versus financial leaders. At Horizons, we help churches with something called a capacity, propensity, and interest index. And churches that are interested in this will have us take publicly available data and screen and all your nonprofits are doing this. Everybody's being screened on a daily basis by all kinds of folks. So we're not talking about something that is not a daily practice, but it will allow the church to identify who the high capacity donors are. And by doing that with church after church after church, what we see is that the high capacity donors, those with the greatest capacity, are also, and those who are given the most in the global sense, are also the ones who are giving the smallest percentage to the local church. So there's a big gap between capacity to give and the choice to give to your church. And by developing a relationship with these persons, because they're still having the same struggles that your financial leaders are, developing the relationship with them, you are much more likely to draw them, to interest them in the work of the church. So I would say when we see a typical if we see a typical church of their top 100 high capacity givers, we're only seeing about 30% of those show up as financial leaders in the church. These people are given in other places, they're just not given to the church.
And Joe, to underscore that point, I worked with a church several years ago where in a conversation with one of their high capacity givers who was deeply in love with Jesus, a committed follower of Christ, very engaged in leadership in the church, but shared with me that if they were to tithe off of their network or off of their annual income, if they were to give a tithe to the church, it would be more than their total church budget. And so they give generously, but to your point, they give to a number of different places. Now, we were able to have a conversation around different ways to give to the church, and that's another webinar. But this is a group that may not show up in your top 20 or in your financial leaders, but you have an opportunity to disciple them to become more generous givers. So a couple of things about them, and this is only 5. There are many more common characteristics. For the sake of brevity and for this webinar this morning, I chose 5 that seem to be most salient to this conversation. These are common characteristics of these folk that have the capacity to make a high impact gift. First, they do want a relationship with the senior leadership of the organizations that they support, and that includes the church. Often they see giving as a privilege, not as an obligation or a duty. But this is something that they feel it is a privilege to do, to invest God's blessings in their life in the places where they see organizations, including the church, making a difference in people's lives. I think this is so important and so appropriate for this season. They want to be seen as human. As someone once said, they believe in their cut, they get their feelings hurt. Joe mentioned earlier, they often come across as being strong, and they should as leaders, but inside, this is a season that they may be carrying a unique and an unusual amount of stress and pressure. And so they want to be seen as a spouse trying to be a good spouse, as a parent and a grandparent. I think fourth, this is a group that they feel they have more to offer than financial resources. And fifth, just as a reminder that they rarely see their giving to the church as a part of their tax planning. So this is a great opportunity, we believe at Horizons, just to set the stage for a long-term ministry, a long-term discipleship-driven ministry to this group. And so, similar to what we've said earlier about some of the other groups, consider reaching out to this group personally by phone, if you can, and just simply ask the following question. Maybe you just start by saying, hey, I just wanted to check on you. Just wanted to see how you're doing. I know that you are running this company or this business, and I know that a lot of things are going on financially. I just want to see how you're doing. How's your family holding up in these days? How are things with your work and your business? How can I, as your pastor, pray for you? How can the church be there for you? So these are questions that are similar to earlier groups that we've talked with, but here is a distinction with this group, different from the other groups we mentioned. Consider at some point in a conversation, maybe toward the end, simply saying, would you be interested in meeting for coffee on a regular basis, maybe monthly? As we were preparing for this webinar, we were talking about maybe initially it is a virtual coffee. But after restrictions are lifted, there's something about this one-on-one, eyeball-to-eyeball meeting with these folk, just pastoring them and being there for them. And maybe what you share with them is, I'd just love to pick your brain on a few things. I'd love to lean into your leadership. I'd love to lean into your wisdom. And so to kind of recap our conversation this morning, this is about staying engaged and connected with your leadership, that 20% that does 80%, your ministry leaders, your financial leaders, your top givers, and then those within your church that God has given the gift of earning and a heart of generosity. And so to kind of bring my part to a conclusion, and then we're going to open it up for questions. I just think it's important. We at Horizons think it's important for your leadership to see you giving compassionate and strong leadership, proactive leadership in this season, and to see you working collaboratively together with other leaders in your church for the good of the families of your church, for the good of the ministries of the church, for the good of the church at large, your community, and in the cause. Together, we are better and we are stronger.